Hi everyone, I'm Zach Reinhardt. Yes, the beard is gone, and I'm here to review the new Tempalay album, From Japan 2. Tempalay is a three-piece indie rock band from Tokyo, Japan, and this is their second album following up their first album, From Japan. On their first album, Tempalay approached indie rock and indie pop with a great respect for classic bands of the 60s and 70s, and a love of psychedelic, kind of phased out guitars and tight grooves. I was a big fan of that first album, and on this new release, Tempalay does much of the same formula, though expanding on it a little bit to include some elements of R&B and even some hip-hop and funk into their mix as well. This album kicks off with the track Time Machine, which starts off with a lively guitar riff and a tight groove and some spacey guitar tones that remind me a little bit of the band Yura Yura Teikoku, which is an influence that shows up a few times across this album. The song has a fairly catchy vocal melody, a tight groove, and it ends nicely by bringing back the riff from the very beginning of the song, but it doesn't really have any identifying features that mark it as an intro to the album. The song is catchy enough and performed well and recorded well, and the production is really on point, but it is the first sign of one of my biggest complaints on the album, which is just the general lack of structure. It kind of just feels like a compilation of songs. However, even if the album is a little bit disorganized, the content on it is pretty solid throughout. Songs like Kaiju Tachi no Shima, Natsu no Yuwaku, and Kakume all have a kind of classic, almost 60s rock inspired sound, though with a modern edge that reminds me a bit of the band The Lemon Twigs. These songs all have really great grooves, nice guitar tones, and there's a lot of character in the performances. All the instruments are really given a moment to shine, and the songwriting is very solid as well. That there's a little bit of math in there just to keep you on your toes, but everything is fairly accessible and easy to listen to while still being interesting. And the band really shows off their psych rock chops on my favorite track on here, My Name is Green Man, which is track 6. This song features some spacey guitars and a kind of lo-fi sounding drum tone that all adds up to a very subdued, slow, and smooth groove that carries the song for the first half of it. This song constantly kind of plays with your expectations. It does a verse, and then it starts to build up into what you think might be a chorus, but then it just does another verse. And then when it finally starts building up into the first chorus, rather than the first chorus being kind of explosive and bigger than the verse, it's even smaller, slower, and more subdued and quiet than before, but is incredibly compelling, catchy, and has just a really great tight groove to hold it all together. And then that explosion you were waiting for comes right after the chorus ends as we go into this almost Hendrix-like guitar solo with wah and phasers on it that's accompanied by an explosive rhythm section that really picks up the pace here. It goes into the second chorus, which features these just big, dramatic organ chords over top of the whole thing. And the song is just really wonderful to listen to. It's constantly kind of playing with what you're expecting and messing around a little bit with the structure of things, but it's all still very accessible and easy to listen to, but still features a little bit of an experimental, kind of psychedelic edge that I really enjoy a lot. The band explores a bit of a softer psychedelic sound on the track San Francisco, which is really dreamy and pretty and very pleasant to listen to. And while I'm not entirely sold on the verse, I think it's just okay, the chorus is really great on this song, one of the standout choruses on the album for sure. However, it's not all sunshine and rainbows on this album. There are a few tracks that I'm a little less enthused by. The 10th track, Shinkai Yori, is a song that explores some just smooth, spacey textures and a kind of underwater aesthetic, given its name. Shinkai means, I think, like underwater, or something along those lines. But the song doesn't really do anything to differentiate itself from the other tracks that have a lot of the same textures, and it comes off as a bit like filler. It's one of the only tracks that doesn't have anything really unique about it, and it doesn't help that the vocal melody has a very similar motif as the track that just happened 2 songs before it, which makes it seem even more just kind of iterative on their other stuff. I'm also not as enthused by some of the poppier and more dancey tracks on here, like the track Shinserai, which has a kind of weird off-kilter verse that I do enjoy. But when it comes into this chorus with this very dancey, like, kind of rhythm from the drums, I'm just really unenthused about it. And the song Zombie Song, featuring Ritmo, who does some beatboxing on here, feels a little clumsily put together. The chorus and verse don't really gel together all that well, I don't think. And the verse features this kind of bouncy, upbeat groove with these spoken vocals that I'm not enthused about at all. And while the chorus is solid, I think the songwriting overall is a little clumsy, and I think it really hurts the track. However, I think they do a little bit better with that kind of poppier sound on the closer, Sore Ja Mata, which has a smooth, kind of R&B inspired groove, a little touch of jazz in the chord progression as well. The drums have a really nice tone, the production is really on point here, and there's just some nice kind of jazzy guitar noodling going on for the song. And while it does end rather abruptly and leaves the album feeling a little bit weird as the closer, it is a pretty alright track. And one thing I do need to talk about before we wrap up is the production on this album. The production is very stylized. It features a lot of interesting drum tone that's kind of lo-fi and sometimes almost sounds like a parallel compressed like hip hop drum loop or something that gives it a very interesting stylized sound that almost, it seems like the kind of comic book aesthetic of music production. It has a very unique mixing and production style to it that I think alone is kind of worth at least giving a listen. But overall, this thing is pretty solid. There are a lot of good tracks on here. There are a lot of really solid tracks that are all well performed. But there's a little bit of filler on here, and there are a few tracks that I'm a little less convinced by, that feel like they're not contributing all that much to the album as a whole. But it's hard to really comment on stuff like that just because of how compilation kind of best hits-y this album feels. It doesn't really have a discernible structure from front to back, and as a result, it kind of starts and ends in a weird place, and I feel like I could jumble these songs up in pretty much any order and come out with an equally valid way to listen to it and experience. But overall, this is a pretty solid album of some kind of psychedelic indie rock with pop sensibilities for sure, though there aren't really any big, powerful, catchy pop choruses on here, which I think could have added a bit to the album, but I think they do pretty well without them as well. And I'm feeling a 7.5 out of 10 on this album. This is a pretty solid listening experience if you're into this. If you digged other kind of indie psych rocky bands I've reviewed in the past, like Thank You Cream, or maybe a less experimental version of Clan Eileen. If you enjoy those bands, then definitely give this thing a listen. And that's me. This is the new Tempalay album. It's called From Japan 2, and I'll see you guys next week for a new review. Peace.